know who has access to what? This is the Identity at the Center podcast. If you're looking for identity and access management talk, you've come to the right place. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to another episode of the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim.
I'm Jim.
You're Jim. I'm recording live on digital tape from the Rochester, New York Airport Marriott that is not really by the airport. Jim, you know what that's like, right?
I do. But they do have a shuttle service to the airport, so
I guess that's how they make that.
I highly recommend it.
Yeah, people here are very friendly, but it is not by the airport. I guess the shuttle service is how they are able to make that claim.
Yes,
but I guess close enough. I'm in Rochester. You were here with me this week. I'm headed home today. We've got a little bit of a garbage plate of IAM topics that we're going to talk about today.
You got to explain that one though.
In honor of Rochester, it's a famous dish. Although it can't be too famous because I'd never really heard about it till I came here. It's basically exactly what it sounds like, a garbage plate. Fries, beans, macaroni, whatever, topped with different types of meat, cheeseburger, hamburger, Italian sausage, steak, chicken, whatever, meat you want on top of it, and then hot sauce on top. It sounds gross. People swear by it around here, though. So in honor of that garbage plate, I think we'll probably collect a few different odds and ends of IAM topics. And we'll do that in honor of Rochester. How's that sound?
So I think the thing I like about the garbage plate is that you can have any of the items that you want, and you don't have to have any of the items that you don't want. So in other words, it's a plate full of things that you like. The thing I don't like about the garbage plate is the name. I'm not eating anything that's called garbage.
Well, they have so many different names for it. There's garbage plate. There's like junk plate. I mean, it's not appetizing.
You haven't named the kind of plate that I want to eat yet.
Right. We used to have garbage nachos when I was working in food service a long time ago. But that's just basically nachos with just everything thrown on top of them, which is, I guess, the same kind of concept.
All the food that you're going to get rid of. You know what they have? Different cities have that special dish. I know. I think it's Cincinnati has one where it's like chili on top of spaghetti and
spaghetti or macaroni. Yeah, 3-way, 2-way, 5-way.
I like that. I like the Piemonte sandwich in. I think that's a Pittsburgh thing. They put French fries on the sandwich.
I don't know that one.
Oh yeah, Piemonte's. That's like if anybody out there from Pittsburgh, you gotta email into the show and let us know if I got it right. But that's like, a sandwich with French fries on it, which I think it's a capital idea.
Anything fried between bread?
Yeah, pretty much.
Very,
well, no, French fries. I don't know. It's just got a special place in my heart.
Well, I think we're gonna make ourselves hungry here, so we should probably dive into some IAM topics. The first one that I want to talk about is something that has come up recently in one of our engagements. That's really how you handle an access request service catalog. Set the stage on that. I mean, it's really typically, you need a way to make requests for access, and there's different products that can do that, whether it's an IJ product, but a lot of companies are also using ITSM tools like Workday or BMC products, those sorts of things, right? To be able to have a way for people to go off and request access. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I see this as really one of the first front doors for customers of your IAM program coming in and using your services. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, and by customers, you're talking about like your internal customers.
In an enterprise scenario.
I agree. I mean, we see it all the time, especially with ServiceNow becoming so popular. Maybe it's originally procured to have a service, an interface to request services or assets, physical assets especially. So I need a phone, I need a headset. You can go into the service catalog, request it. It'll have a workflow to make sure that it gets approved by the right person. and then all of a sudden, it ends up as a ticket. So it's kind of an ITIL structure in terms of it's a ticket-based approach. Makes a lot of sense. You can see how it could be extended to use for help desk tickets and you know cyber requests. And then so a lot of times where we enter the picture, an organization's already taken many of these steps, and they say, well, the next natural extension is to have the IT service management system available to request cyber access. So to request roles and accounts on various applications. And that's where I think it maybe goes a step too far. And the reason I say that is that, well, if you take a step back, you go into an organization that doesn't have the concept of a service catalog or ITSM, you take a picture of, okay, what do you need from from identity management? And it's the full life cycle. And it starts with the concept of, having one place to go, who has access to what, having that picture of all the access that you have in the environment. And it's not just what access you provisioned, right, from uh, your starting point. So in this case, say you service now. So okay, I provision all these accounts, but other access may exist in those applications that you don't have a full picture of. So if you only go to your service catalog and say, hey, we just, and I'm kind of jumping forward here a little bit. We walked somebody out today. Jeff is no longer an employee. We need to make sure we cut off all this access. Give me a report of all the access he has. If I said, well, here's all the access that we gave him out of service now, that's not the full picture necessarily. Maybe it is, but it probably isn't. Jeff probably accumulated access, through initial onboarding, or maybe prior to the ITSM system being stood up, or maybe by some backdoor provisioning process that bypassed the ITSM. So
Right.
the modern day identity governance is pulling all that in and correlating it with an identity from an authoritative source like an HR system, being able to say, here is all the access that Jeff has. So I guess where I'm going is that my big concern is that, implementing an ITSM system isn't going to get you that. They don't have the identity governance capability. So if you're going to use both, you have to figure out a way to integrate them so they work together.
Right. That ticketing system is really just a point in time of when access is requested, but not necessarily fulfilled. Good for audits, et cetera, but any auditor is going to then compare that against the live system to see if that, in fact, that trail still holds true, right? So if something happened out of band, it may not be captured in the ticketing system. But when it comes to making the requests, that's where the access catalog comes in. And there's a few things that I've jotted down as sort of key to making sure that that service is accessible and makes sense for the user and something that they would want to use. And I think the first thing to consider really is data quality going into that system. So a lot of times they'll see applications that have really poor data quality. Sometimes it's even just Active Directory. And by the data quality, I mean, not very business friendly from a group name, right? Lots of slashes and dashes in the name, acronyms, things that maybe don't make sense for the normal user and is more of like an IT speak. So I think one of the first things that I like to consider when building out an access catalog is how do you standardize the information coming in, and how do you come up with business friendly descriptions to be able to make it easy for people to find the access within that catalog. The second part is really around ownership of those catalog items. So when it comes to an entitlement, my belief is that everything should have an owner, and the owner should be on the business side. The business owns the data, and they should be part of this process to help you develop the service catalog for their applications and their data. Now, the business may elect to delegate, the approval function to someone else, but I think ultimately what you want is to have a partnership with the business to make sure that the items that are being loaded for sale, essentially in your shop of IAM, meets their requirements and makes sense for the users who are going to be accessing that, and that the business is on board with that. Especially when it comes time to do reviews, approvals, etc. It needs to be clear that it's not just an IT problem. There's very well a chance that IT might also be the business owner in case of like an IT resource, but you want to make sure that the business is represented and owns, that entitlement. What are your thoughts on that, Jim? Have you seen issues where, the business maybe doesn't want to be involved with that, or does want to be involved with it and has taken an interest into that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think I think you need to be clear about what is the expectation in terms of roles and responsibilities. My philosophy is that IT cannot decide who gets access to what. It's not appropriate. The business needs to decide who gets access to what. However, oftentimes IT organizations aren't. I believe that IT organizations' responsibility is to provide the tools to make that a reasonable effort to manage who has access to what. And if, what I see a lot of times is that IT groups don't have the tools or haven't rolled out the tools. And to say to the business, you own this responsibility is it's kind of a unfair ask, I think. But I wanted to go back to the first point that you're making about Active Directory, and it just sparked a thought that I remember. My entryway into IT was I was an MCSE in NT 4.0. So this is going back in the late 90s, and my interest area was directories and network PC networking, and this was the time when Novell was still by far the champion over Microsoft. We all know how that story ended, but I remember so I became a MCSE in Windows 2000, which was the first initiation of Active Directory. I remember the first Active Directory that we pulled over or we created was essentially an upgrade, pulling over all the groups that existed in NT4 into Windows 2000. And I've seen kind of over and over again that the need as you go from version to version is to get all the groups over, right? So you have a project to go from one version to the next, and you just keep dragging along all of the bad structure that you've created. At some point, you need to take time to clean it up. But what happens is that doesn't get cleaned up, and part of why it doesn't get cleaned up is that there's a fear. What is that group being used for? We don't really know what that group is being used for, and that kind of goes to your point of assigning an owner and having metadata around your group so that you know what they're being used for. So that if you read, hey, this is a group being used for JD Edwards. Oh, we don't even use JD Edwards anymore, so we can probably get rid of this group, or hey, that group is owned by John in accounting. We can go talk to John and say, do you guys even use this group anymore? So I think having that metadata is important. The other thing that came to mind is, when you're talking about an access catalog, is that especially in larger organizations, the idea of doing manual administration of the access catalog, it's quite a burden. I don't think you can ever get away from having some manual requirements, but I do think that, in terms of when new entitlements are created in the application, somehow they need to be brought into your access catalog in an automated way. And then there needs to be some kind of alert or something that goes back to a person who can then act on it and say, okay, new entitlement is called group ABC. And, we pulled over some metadata, including the owner of the group, or maybe that was left blank, but we now have to decide, all right, is this a group that can be requested? Maybe need to follow up to see if that group needs to get assigned to certain roles. And I also think, so the idea mainly is that you got to get the group into the access request system, and then you have to enhance it with things like essentially metadata.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, like you said, it's automated. I don't think you get, as you mentioned, fully out of the manual business of maintaining an access catalog. There's always stuff you're going to pull in, and the data you're pulling in, typically, depending on the product, you'll be able to apply a little bit of a translation to it, pull it in, and have like a little technical underpinning behind it, and then on top of it, you've got the business friendly component of what does this group actually mean and who's the approver. But I think it brings out an interesting point, as far as when new groups get created. Part of the hygiene that goes into just creating, let's say, an Active Directory group is to work with the teams that are creating those groups, Windows admins, et cetera, server admins, and work with them to collect all the data that's needed to make sure that when it gets into the Access Catalog, who to contact, who's the owner for it, what's the, what is this group used for, et cetera, so that you're not starting from essentially zero when a group gets created. That's done after the fact, or maybe it's done separate from whatever project is done to import maybe a mass group of them, et cetera.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And the other thought would be that, all right, if you're managing a system and so the system is integrated with your service or your access request system. In other words, you can't get into group ABC unless it goes through this workflow chain and there's automatically provisioned or a ticket is issued. Then the business knows, okay, we created the group in, say, Salesforce, but at the same time, we need to go back into our access request system, our access catalog, and make sure that entitlement gets requestable. Now, whether or not they can go self-service and manage things in the access catalog, probably not, but maybe. But the business has to kind of be bought into that process that, you go ahead and create your entitlement. It's going to get pulled over into our access catalog, but then, in order to make it requestable, you have to go through and provide this other metadata, like who's going to approve that role, who's the owner for that role, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I find if you work off of almost like a templatized nature of it, works pretty well. That's how I've done it in the past. Is here's all the roles and here's all the entitlements. So let's create corresponding business-friendly descriptions around it, owners, and work with the business to say, okay, here's this access. Here's what it does. Does this description make sense? Do we need to make tweaks to it, et cetera? And then I like to have the business act as the the sign off to say, okay, are you good with this data? This is what we're going to use to for people to make requests to your application. And if you're good with it, then we'll move it into production, so to speak, whether that means, some sort of flat file import into the ITSM or ticketing tool or IGA tool, or, manual data entry if it comes down to that.
Right, right. Well, I do think so. Kind of where we started this call was that I think a lot of organizations want to use your ITSM system from a user experience standpoint as one place to go to access or to request stuff. Uh, the systems generally do a really good job of workflow. I've seen some of the systems that have fantastic user interface. So I recently saw the BMC digital workplace tool. Man, is that a great user interface? It's very similar to an Amazon checkout type experience. The thing
Yeah, I
is,
was
from
impressed.
my perspective, is that where it falls short is that there's not a full IGA system. So if you're going to use that to request cyber access, you need to still close the gap around, the ultimate. This is kind of my perspective on IAM overall is that the most important thing about having a good IAM architecture is being able to answer the question of who has access to what. In other words, if I'm in charge of IAM and someone, rightfully comes to me and says, what access does Jeff Stedman have? I should be able to pull up a screen and say, this is everything that he has, everything of significance anyway. So if you have
Mhm.
things that you've determined are not significant, in other words, they don't pose enough risk to the organization to even track them, fine. But everything that has significance, that has some risk associated to the organization, I should be able to say, this is what Jeff has access to. Because if the next statement that they make is, okay, well, you know, Jeff left the company 5 minutes ago. Let's make sure we shut that all off. Then boom, I can go in and kick off the shut off of all that access, whether it's automated or it's issuing tickets or whatever.
Right. Having that awareness, right, of what I had when I left, that's key. And it stretches beyond to logical access, right? It can, in a more mature environment, can stretch into physical. What are the different devices that were assigned to me? Credit cards, laptops, phones, ID badge, all those things ideally would be assigned to me. I think one thing that gets lost in the shuffle sometimes are the accounts that I might have shared with other people. And that's where a privileged access management tool really does a good job. If you're vaulting credentials that I might share with other folks, service accounts, admin accounts, those sorts of things, makes it an easy way to rotate that password so that you mitigate the risk of the individual who's left being able to still access resources that maybe weren't directly in my name, but that I would still have access to. And you hear every once in a while a story, right? System administrator left and locked something up. I think San Francisco was a city that had to deal with that not too long ago, maybe a few years ago. Those shared accounts are definitely a risk area that you want to be able to address as well.
Well, and like we talked about in a previous podcast, um, it's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when
Yep.
something's going to happen. And then it's, when somebody does compromise an account, if they're planning to do bad things with the account, they're not going to say, "Hey, I've got an account." So that person could be in the network and doing things for, it's on average that data breaches aren't discovered for about a half a year. And that's a number that stayed consistent over the years. So a lot of different organizations have done the same type of analysis over the past decade. And that time is not really shrinking. The amount of time it takes to discover that you've been breached. And it takes about on average 2.5 months to 75 days to actually recover from a breach, or not recover, but just actually close the breach.
Yeah. Plus you've
You
got
may
all the
never
costs
recover.
associated with it too.
You may never recover completely. I mean, it depends. You
Yeah.
can shut your business down.
Yeah, if it's reputation, if it's if it harms reputation enough, that could be the end of it. And there are certainly financial penalties to pay off of it, just from cleanup costs, et cetera, but also from stock values, et cetera. So, I think sometimes, people are looking for justification as to why you do IAM. That's one of the reasons. It's not a matter of if, but when. And when it happens, you want to be able to identify the problems quicker, be able to spot problems faster and remediate them faster and be able to address the gaps that might be out there. And IAM is a critical component of that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, over the years of having talked to people about data breaches, and maybe 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, talking about them as like, oh, it's fear, uncertainty, doubt, FUD factor, that you're just trying to get money for security by scaring me.
Right.
The reality is you should be scared. You should be very scared. And so maybe it's sometimes people just can't listen because they think that you have a motivation. You're a consultant and you're trying to sell security software. Usually we're not in those shoes of trying to sell something, but still we are consultants in this industry. But the fact of the matter is, like, a new breach pops up, it seems like every day, or at least every week. There's a DoorDash one, security or data breach, I think, last week, right? So that's something that I think we should podcast about when more information comes out. But I think that's it. I think that it's not just fear, uncertainty, doubt. It's very real. And when you can start showing, hey, within your industry or very similar industry, these are some of the hacks that have taken place recently, then it's something that should be paid attention to, and is getting more attention paid to it.
Yeah, you don't want your company to be associated with a hack. I mean, think about Target, right? That was kind of like one of the first big ones where now you say the target hack and most people in the industry know exactly what you're talking about. I don't
Right.
think you want to be, have that association. I'm sure Target has done things to get things cleaned up, but they're still recovering, they're still trying to recover the name and the reputation from years and years ago of when that took place. So that's one of the things to think about as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Let's see, what else can we talk about as part of this garbage plate? What about other things around ITSM and IAM? Is there anything else that you want to bring up around that?
Well, so yeah, I mean, when I respect the perspective when an organization wants to achieve one place to go to request stuff. Or we want to leverage our investment in ServiceNow. And what you see is companies like ServiceNow, people who are, or companies in the ITSM space are looking at this and saying, organizations want to use our software for this. So we should start building functionality. The thing is, where they are today, they have a long way to go before they do what an identity governance solution can give them. So at some level, you end up with both. The question is, how do you integrate them? Do you do a full-on integration so that you feel like, it's really how much do you do to achieve that feeling that, hey, I've never left. I never had to leave this application. I never had to leave ServiceNow and I got everything I needed versus I go to one place and there's a kind of a dashboard look and feel, but one of the buttons is request access. And when I do that, it's pretty clear I'm in a different system. I think that second approach makes more sense than trying to do a deep integration where it's more of a API type integration. And the reason is that I feel like changes in these systems are going to happen so fast that you're going to be in the business of integrating these two systems in a big way for years and years. If you try to go down that road, I think you're better off saying our IGA tool is going to do access requests for for cybersecurity, getting accounts to our IT systems, and our ITSM system is going to be where you request physical assets and maybe physical security.
Yeah, I think the line is a little bit blurry. If you had asked me 10 years ago, I'd have said, there's no way an ITSM tool can support approval functions that we need, the security of the data going back and forth because there may be IDs, passwords, etc. And the interface just wasn't very good. Now the interfaces I think have caught up, and I think the question is, where does the line get drawn between access request and access fulfillment? And access fulfillment from a automated standpoint. Can you use Workday, for example, as the front door, handle all the approvals, and then hand that over to an IGA product to do the fulfillment in an automated fashion? Yeah, there's probably cases where that would work, but I think that's where the line is starting to become drawn. Is where does that, where does the fulfillment take place? Some things will always be manual, do it on a ticket. I've taken an approach of thinking of, okay, it makes sense to have everything in kind of one-stop shop, but we have to understand if there are any sacrifices that we're going to have to make for that. Or, does the ITSM tool have the capability to delegate approvals, vacations, out of office, different people for approvers, depending on the access request type, those sorts of things. And then how do you handle things that are not IT? So if you're using your IGA platform to onboard somebody, are you integrated to the level where, yeah, you know what, we just got, let's say, a Workday feed came in. Here's a new hire. We went off and created their Active Directory account and some other accounts. Do we have the capability from the IGA side to push information into an ITSM tool to handle other onboarding activities? Hey, this person needs a laptop. We created their email address. Here's the email address. Here's the domain name. Now the support people who handle physical devices, they get a ticket, and it came from the IGA side as the source of the information, not just the receiver. So I think there's a lot of interplay that can happen there. ID badges, credit cards, etc. I mean, Nirvana state is, someone joins the company and most things are automated, and there's really no reason for a manager to have to submit a ticket for onboarding. The real state is that most companies still have to have a manager or HR or some other person in the process submitting tickets for all this stuff, which is tedious and prone to being forgotten. My favorite when I was in this role was, hey, it's Friday and 4:30, and some manager would come to me and say, hey, I forgot I've got 6 contractors all starting on Monday. It's okay. Well, thanks for that. So I guess I know what I'm doing, for the next few hours, later on a Friday night, getting these guys set up. But if you can avoid that situation through automation, but being able to tie together your IGA and your ticketing systems, I think that's really where most companies want to go. But you just have to recognize the strengths of each platform and play to each of those. And there may be times where you do want to settle on one application and kind of do that, but you have to understand what you're giving up in that scenario.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to kind of what the ITSM's tool gives you, it's going to give you a platform for making the requests and making the workflows. Is not going to give you a full database of what exists out there. And even when it comes to assets, it's like, it's going to know the assets that it provisions. It's going to be able to give you a record of them, but it's not an asset management system. And
Right.
I think it's kind of the same thing when it comes to cyber access. It's a great interface for requesting access. And I think a lot of the systems in the ITSM space have now gotten really good at, issuing tickets to go ahead and complete provisioning. And they've even come with some automated provisioning to basic endpoints like Active Directory. However, they're not full identity management systems. They're not going to tell you who has access to what. And so I think they serve an important place, and they support an important function, but it's not the be all and end all. That's my opinion. And I'm sure there are people out there who are screaming at their radio or whatever they're listening to this podcast on, and that's great. I'd love to hear some feedback, because honestly, this is an industry that's evolving so much. And what we do is we constantly take in so many different perspectives, marry that up with our own experience, and then formulate opinions. And those opinions change over time.
Right. And seeing what works and what doesn't work at all the organizations that we work with. I mean, it's always an interesting struggle, and I can certainly appreciate both sides of it. And my thought has gone back and forth. That's the great thing about opinion, is it can change if the facts change, and that's typically the way that I approach it as well. I guess at the very base, a ticketing system is not necessarily an IAM system. That's just the way that I look at it.
I agree.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a pretty good spot to leave it for this week. Appreciate you jumping on with me, Jim, and we'll be talking.
It's my birthday, Jeff.
It is Jimmy Mac's birthday. He has graciously donated an hour of his time on his birthday, which we all appreciate. Hope you have a good birthday.
Thanks.
I know I'll be seeing you next week. So
I have him every year, though, so it's not that big of a deal.
We'll catch you again next year.
All right. Hope we're still doing the podcast.
I'm sure we'll still do our podcast. We're doing our best to try and keep up with the weekly schedule. So far so good. A couple times behind the scenes, it's gotten a little bit close just based on timing, but far we've managed.
Jeff, if people are appreciating the podcast and want to see us keep doing it, I think there's a couple things that they can do to help make sure that keeps happening. One is, fill our mailbags. We're at identity@thecenter.com. You can
questions
send us
at identity@thecenter.com. Yep.
That's the email, right? But you can also go to our website with the same domain.
Yep.
And you can, and I noticed we have a send a message button there, so it's pretty cool. And then the other thing is obviously rate and review the podcast, and 5 stars would certainly be appreciated.
Yep. Share with your friends, help us grow the audience. Kind of helps provide some validation that somebody's listening to us out there. We're still a terrestrial podcast, so still looking for our first extraterrestrial.
What I think would be really cool is, like, if we could start to build some community around the podcast, and it's probably gonna take some time to formulate. And then we have little meetups at the major conferences, so like Identiverse and Gartner, just have like a little meetup. So you know, people. I mean, a big part of what makes our IAM practitioner community what it is the ability to meet face to face and build network and bounce ideas off of each other. But that's how you learn, is to know what other people are doing and what kind of experiences they're having. So I'm hoping that over the period of time, over the next year, maybe by my next birthday, we're more in a position to really call it a community and start having some of these meetups.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, Jim and I are both going to be at the Gartner IAM conference in Las Vegas in December. If you're going to be there and you'd want to say hello and commiserate or just chat or fist bump, whatever it is, shoot us an email at questions@identitycenter, and maybe we can make that a thing. Who knows? Maybe we may be able to do some live podcast recording while we're out there. And Jim and I are always constantly trying to figure out ideas on how to make this entertaining and informative and inclusive of folks. So if you've got questions or ideas, or if that's something that maybe sounds interesting, hit us up on email, and we read them all and we get back to everyone. So with that public service announcement, I think we'll call this garbage complaint cleaned. Happy birthday, Jim. And we'll talk to folks in the next one. Thanks all.
You've been listening to the Identity at the Center podcast. To access all episodes, visit identityatthecenter.com.